Greetings, my name is Carl Zulauf. I'm a professor of agricultural economics at Ohio State University. I am here to discuss with you the crop program decisions that you will need to make under the 2014 Farm Bill. Let us now take a look at some of these decisions and some of the things that you will need to consider. First, I'd like to begin by reviewing the decisions that you need to make. There will be three of them. There is a yield update decision that can be made through February 27, 2015. There is a base acre reallocation decision that can be made again through February 27, 2015. And there is a program choice decision with its final date being March 31st, 2015. So there is some overlap on the time for these decisions, but the program choice decision has to be made have to be made at a later date than either the base acre allocation decision and the yield update decision. I want to talk about each one of these decisions. I will start by talking about the yield update decision. This is one that every FSA farm owner should actively do, even though you don't necessarily have to do it. There is a default option here. You may keep your current counter-cyclical program yields. This is the default option. Or you may use another option, which is 90% of a simple average for the years 2008 through 2012. And you will want to look at these options and compare them. The word simple has meaning in this particular case because you include all years in the calculation, including low yield years, so there's no discarding of either high yields or low yields in this calculation, and it only uses the years for which there is a planted acre on that particular FSA farm, and we are talking about the FSA farm, not a crop production farm. So this is an FSA farm number. The elections are made on a crop-by-crop basis for each of the individuals, that each of the individual FSA farms that you have. And so you may update the crop acres for some crops and not for other crops. The decision is pretty straightforward, but the updated yields may be lower, and there's some other nuances to this decision that I want to discuss with you, and in particular through the use of an example. This is simply an example that's created. It represents no individual particular farm. You can see that you have yields per planted acre in different situations, and I want to go through each one of those situations. This is a crop that was planted in 2008, but there is no evidence for that particular year. And so that year will have what's called a substitute yield that is used for it, and the substitute yield is 75% of the 2008 through 2012 county average yield. So if there's any year for which you do not have the evidence or cannot get the evidence, the yield that will go into the update calculation would be 75% of the 2008 through 2012 county average yield. In all other years, this is a minimum yield. For example, in this particular situation, if you look at the year 2012, the actual yield that the farmer had in this situation was 100 bushels an acre. And this is per planted acre, not on a harvested acre basis, and that is less than the 112 substitute yield. And so the yield that would be used that year is the substitute yield of 112, not the 100 bushel that was actually achieved that year. So there is this playoff that occurs between this substitute yield and the actual yield that on the planted acres. If there was no planted acres during that year to that crop, and that year is not included in the calculation. This is the notion of a simple average. So you literally could have only 1 year in the 2008 through 2012 period that you planted to a crop, and that would be the yield that you could have as the update. So there are lots of ways that you could actually end up with a smaller yield than what your current countercyclical yield, and the only way that you can do that is actually to use to do the calculations, to use one of the program calculators that exist out there, and there are several that are available to do this. The other thing that I would point out that is a really important consideration in this decision is FSA will allow you to self-report your yields, and then they will come in and randomly select people to be checked for the verification of those yields. And so when you're reporting yields for a year, or when you're reporting the production that will be used to calculate the yields for that year, you need to consider whether you can verify those yields should you be selected for verification purposes by the Farm Service Agency or FSA. And that's an important consideration. If you can't verify the yields, then you will basically have no planted evidence for that year. If you cannot provide documentation or decide that you cannot provide documentation, and the yield for that year would then become 75% of the county average yield or the replacement yield. So it is possible, if you have no way of verifying or choose not to verify the yields, you will always have the 75% of the county average yield, and so that becomes sort of a minimum yield, and that yield may become the yield that actually is higher than your current yield. So one of the things to possibly consider is that even though I may not be able to verify my yields, that doesn't mean that your yield might not necessarily go up because of the update decision and because of the existence of the substitute yield. This completes the discussion of the Farm Program Yield Update decision, and we will now move on to another discussion. FSA farm owners will also have a program acre reallocation decision. The word reallocation has significance in this particular decision because your base acres will not increase or decrease at all, but will stay the same, but you will have the option to allocate them in one of two ways. The default option is the current program acres. So if you do nothing, you will keep your current program acres however they are divided among the crops that they are divided among, such as corn, soybeans, wheat, which are the more common crops in the state of Ohio, but you may also have oats and barley acres, program acres here in the state. The alternative, or the option to reallocate, is your current total program acres allocated by the share of the covered crops, and covered crops is the same as program crop, acres planted or prevented planting to each of the program crops during the 2009 through 2012 years. So the first thing to note is that compared to the yield update decision, which used the years 2008 through 2012, the program base acre or program acre reallocation decision uses the years 2009 to 2012. This is a FSA farm decision, so you would make this decision not on a crop by crop basis as the program yield decision was, but you will make this on an FSA farm decision, and that means that it's either all the yields, either all the base acres are reallocated or none of the base acres are reallocated. So you either have option 1 or option 2 above. This is an important decision because both the both the ARC and the PLC program makes their payments on program acres, not on planted acres. So whatever your program acres are on that FSA farm, that is the acres on which you will be paid, not to the crop that that farm is planted to. Again, I think an illustration is a useful to help you understand this decision and understand the kind of issues that you might want to consider. I've created an example here. Again, this is no particular farm. It is an example farm. The crops that are on the farm that have been planted over the years 2009 through 2012 include alfalfa, which is not a program crop, and I put a non-program crop in here because I wanted to illustrate that those crops will not factor into this decision. To begin with, you have a current program base that is distributed among the crops. Again, there's nothing in alfalfa because it's not a program crop. 50 of the 100 acres are in corn, 10 is in oats, 30 is in soybeans, 10 is in wheat. So you have a total covered crop or total program acres of 100 acres. And then they were planted, that 100 acres was planted to various crops in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. For example, the acres in corn was 50 in 2009, 40 in 2010, 30 in 2011, and 40 in 2012. You will notice that no acres were planted to oats and acres were planted to wheat in only 2 of the 4 years. What you then do is you create the average plantings over those 4 years. So you would sum the number of acres that was planted and divide it by 4. And what you end up with is 40 acres of corn on average that was planted over the 4 years, none of oats, 36 of soybeans, and 4 of wheat. And that gives you a total acres planted to program crops of 80. Even though there was 100 acres planted on this farm, remember that 20 of them were planted to alfalfa, which is not a program crop and does not come into play in this particular decision. So then what you do is you take the average acres that was planted to the program crops and divide each of those by 80 to get the percent of acres among program crops that was planted to that particular crop. In the case of corn, we planted 40 acres to corn on this FSA farm out of a total of 80 program acres that was planted on this farm. So corn accounted for 50% of all program acres, and so on. In this particular case, soybeans are 45% of the acres, program acres on the farm, and then wheat is then 5%. Then what you do is you take these percentages, what I call the reallocate percentages, and you multiply them by 100 acres of base, because this farm has 100 acres of base on it. And so your new base acres would be a combination of 50 acres of corn base, 0 acres of oats base, 45 acres of program acres in soybeans, and 5 program acres in wheat. So what you would then do is you would compare, choices would be to have your current base acre allocation, which is 50 of corn, 10 of oats, 30 of soybeans, and 10 of wheat. Or you could take the reallocated option, which would be 50 of corn, 0 of oats, 45 of soybeans, and 5 acres of wheat. So you would have the choice of, do you want to take on additional soybean base acres and give up oats and wheat base acres? Again, please understand that this is not an update. So if you only have 3 base acres, for example, you will still only have 3 base acres. All you can do is reallocate among the crops that you planted in 2009 through 2012 the base acres themselves, but you can't increase or decrease the acres. So it's not really a program acre update decision. It really is a program acre reallocation decision. By far the most common reallocation decision that most farmers in the Midwest and in Ohio will have to debate and discuss and decide is, do I want to take on additional soybean acres and give up wheat acres, give up oats acres, give up barley acres, because soybean acres have been increasing in this state. And so this is the base acre reallocation decision. I want to underscore that I think this is a really important decision. I think for many farmers this will be just as important as the program choice. For others it won't be, because there isn't much difference between the reallocated and the current base acres. But for those farmers that have significant changes in planting history over those 4 years and do have significant changes in base acres, this becomes an important decision, because the base acres is what determines the payments by the ARC program and by the PLC program. So again, please give this decision your time and effort. It is an important one. With that, I will stop discussion of this particular decision.
I would now like to talk about the commodity program choice that producers have to make. And this is a decision made by the farm producer, not by the farm operator, as the two other previous decisions that were discussed, the yield update and the acre allocation decision. Key attributes of this decision: that this is a one-time choice. It covers the crop years from 2014 to 2018, or through 2018. It is irrevocable after the sign-up period has ended, so you cannot go back and revise this. The decision follows the land, not the owner or the producer. So if a new producer would come to this particular FSA farm, the farm would remain in the program that was selected as of the last sign-up day. The same thing is true if the owner changes. The new owner would have the program that the old owner had agreed to. So it follows the land, not the owner or the producer. There are 3 program options. There is the price loss coverage option, the agricultural risk coverage county option, or the ARC-CO, the agricultural risk coverage option individual, ARC-IC. The first 2 decisions are made by crop and by farm, and they can be mixed. So you can pick PLC for corn on an FSA farm and ARC-CO for soybeans on that farm. In contrast, ARC-IC is an entire farm decision. It's not made by crop. Key point to keep in mind, there is a default option. If no program is elected by the producer, or if there are multiple producers, and there are many FSA farms on which there are multiple producers, if those producers on that FSA farm disagree on the election, so this covers 2 situations: no program is elected, or the producers on the FSA farm disagree on the election, there is no payment for 2014, and the farm is in PLC for 2015 through 2018. So while there is a default option, this is the default option that has a cost. And the cost is that you really have no program choice. You are in PLC. And the other and far more potentially important cost is that you would not be eligible for any payments in 2014. And then finally, please note that there's a distinction between sign-up and enrollment. What we're talking about here is sign-up. What sign-up really does is reserve your right to then enroll in the program. So just because you have signed up for ARC-CO does not mean that you are in the program for ARC-CO for a given year. You must subsequently enroll in the program for that year. And enrollment will come after sign-up. We don't know the current dates for enrollment, but it will be subsequent to March 31, 2015. And the current expectations is that FSA will allow you to enroll at that time for both 2014 and 2015. What I would like to do is begin with some summary thoughts to help you see the bigger picture that I think you should think about, and then we'll go into the specifics. So I'm going to do the summary first as opposed to last. I think the first key point to keep in mind is that U.S. agriculture is rediscovering that the crop safety net has two pillars, not one. The first is commodity programs. The second is insurance. Commodity programs address multiple year risk, and they are a very real risk in farming, as we're finding out this year. Multiple year declines in prices and yields do happen. An important point to remember here is that risk management programs are designed for a specific risk. Crop insurance is a program that is designed to handle the risk that occurs between essentially planting and harvest. It can handle yield risk or revenue risk, depending on what the producer chooses. And in doing that, that is what its objective is, and that's what the risk is. And you have to associate a risk management program with the risk that it's designed to cover. Insurance does not cover multiple year risk. The reason it doesn't cover multiple year risk is that the price is reset every year based on the market conditions. For corn and wheat, that happens in February. And you don't know what those prices are going to be until you get to February. So there's no risk that it really covers between the harvest of the previous year and the planting of the next year. It's reset every year. That's neither a good nor bad component of the program. It is simply a component that you need to understand. What is the risk the program is helping you manage? Economics clearly indicates that you will want to wait to make this decision, because waiting improves the information that you know about 2014 payments. You will have, by the time we get to March 2015, a very good idea on yields, particularly at the county level. USDA NASS has historically released those yields in late February, so they will be available. And the price will be much more well known for 2014 when you get to March, because you're 6+ months into the crop year for corn and soybeans, as opposed to right now where you're at the beginning of the crop year in terms of October, November. So there's a real incentive to wait, but I would like to quickly add that all producers can't wait to the last day to make a decision. You can't get through FSA. So you need to figure out now how you want to handle this incentive to wait to make the decision. Think about scheduling an appointment with your Farm Service Agency, locking in a time that's closer to the decision deadline of March 31st. We will have limited, if any, insight on the 2015 payments by the time we get to the end of the enrollment period. There will be some, I think, particularly for wheat, but it won't be very large, and there will be very little information on 2016, 2017, and 2018, which are part of this decision also. So there is a large amount of uncertainty surrounding this decision. Because more is known about 2014, one of the really critical questions that I think all producers will have to ask themselves is, do they want to assign more value, or what economists would say is more weight, for the 2014 payment because I know more about it? That's going to be an important question. As I had previously said, you have to think of risk programs in terms of the type of risk that they are trying to help you manage. One of the interesting characteristics of this decision, and most farmers will be making the decision between ARC-CO and PLC, is that these programs are actually different more than they are similar in terms of the risk that they help you manage. ARC-CO's strength is in multiple year shallow losses. For example, and what I mean by this is if the corn crop year price stays between $3.50 and $4.25, $3.50 and $4.50, somewhere in that range for the next 4 to 5 years, ARC-CO will make payments, and it will help you manage that multiple year shallow risk. PLC strength, in contrast, is with multiple year disaster price situations. For example, if corn's crop year average price is below $3 for multiple years between 2014 and 2018, ARC will make payments, but it won't make nearly the payments that PLC will. And PLC is by far the better program for helping you manage the multiple year disaster price scenario. So my point is that these programs are actually different risk management programs because their strength and their primary design is a different type of risk. Multiple year shallow risk in the case of ARC-CO, the disaster price scenario in the part of PLC. I'd like to reiterate something that I said previously at this point in the summary, that an FSA farm producer with more than one FSA farm or more than one program crop can mix and match ARC-CO and PLC SCO. SCO is supplemental coverage option, and we will talk about that later. It's a insurance product that's only available for price loss coverage. But you can mix and match ARC-CO and PLC. You can mix them by crop. You can mix them across farms. Particularly if you have more than one FSA farm, I think you need to ask yourself, do you want to diversify your program choice across these programs, across the farm? Let's say you have 2 FSA farms. Do you want to put one of those farms in ARC-CO and another in PLC? Because ARC-CO and PLC address different risk, as we discussed previously. If program choice is something that is of interest to you as a producer, diversifying across the programs, which is a standard economic response in a situation of making decisions under uncertainty, which this decision clearly is. A rule to consider is to put your FSA farms with the highest ratio of the Farm Service Agency farm payment yield to the county average yield, to put that farm that has the highest ratio into PLC. PLC pays on the farm payment yield. ARC-CO pays on the county average yield. Those FSA farms that have the highest ratio of the FSA farm payment yield to county yield has a higher yield component with respect to PLC than to ARC. Flipping that over, those farms for which the county average yield is higher than, or the ratio of the county average yield is highest relative to that FSA farm payment yield, those farms should go in ARC-CO because the county yield is higher or relatively higher than on other farms. So if you're going to make a diversified product choice across programs, across farms, there is a rule, I think, to help you decide which farms go into which program, and that is to look at the ratio of the farm payment yield to the county average yield, and to put those farms that have the highest ratio of the farm payment yield to county yield into PLC. So I think there are several important key questions that you will need to address. There are no right or wrong answers to these questions, but I think these questions are very important in trying to understand the programs and how they best fit your particular farm and your particular farming operation. We will talk in more detail about each of these questions. One, does ARC-IC fit my FSA farm? Remember, ARC-IC is a farm decision, not a crop decision, as is ARC-CO and PLC. Is the new supplemental coverage option insurance, or SCO insurance, is that cost competitive with my higher coverage individual farm insurance? Third question, one we've already discussed in the summary, is how should your reasonably well-known, it won't be perfectly well-known, but you will have significant information on the 2014 payment. How do you want to weight that when you're making your decision, because you will have so much uncertainty about the payments in the later years? And then the fourth one is, if it is possible, i.e. you have more than one FSA farm, you have more than one program choice, and I think this is really relevant if you have more than one FSA farm. Should program choice be diversified across ARC-CO and PLC, as well as ARC-IC? But should you diversify the program choice? These are all big key questions. I want to emphasize that I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer to these questions, but I think these are really critical questions that you need to think about in making this decision. Once you have once you've thought through these big picture questions, then you are able to go to the calculators, to put expected prices into those calculators for 2015 and 2018, and to make decisions that will help you aid in making the decision, not make the decisions. I feel that the calculators are very useful. I encourage every one of you to use them, but as with any calculator, they have limits as to what they can tell you. And it's very important to understand that calculators are only as good as the quality of information that goes into them and as the quality of interpretation of the results that they put out. The 4 questions that I've mentioned to you are really designed to help you enhance the quality of the interpretation of the information generated by the calculators. I'd now like to move to talking about the decisions and the programs in greater detail. I think questions are very important. I think thinking what you should be asking is as important, if not more important, than what the particular answer is, because if you don't ask the right question, you won't be able to get to the right answer, or at least in most cases, that's what will happen. I believe that this question at the top of this page is the big overarching broad question that surrounds the decision of ARC-CO versus PLC versus PLC-SCO decision. And this is the decision that most producers will face in most of their FSA farms. ARC-IC will apply to certain situations, and it's an important situation, and you need to decide whether it does apply to your farm, but it's basically going to be an ARC-CO PLC decision. And this is the question at the top of this page that I think is the encompassing question. For an FSA farm as a whole over the 5 years from 2014 to 2018, is the expected payments from ARC-CO plus the expected net payments from any insurance that I've chosen greater or less than the expected payments by PLC plus the expected net payments from any insurance that I've chosen plus the expected net payments from SCO if I've also chosen SCO. So what I'm saying in this question to you is that the commodity program decision, the ARC-CO PLC decision, is really tied up with your insurance decision. Now, why does this happen? Why is this not just a commodity program decision, but it's a commodity program insurance decision? For a number of reasons. First, you cannot get SCO if you choose ARC. So if SCO is something that you like, and SCO is an insurance product, then you have to pick PLC or you're not in the program. SCO is available to producers who are in none of the commodity programs. In order to also have access to SCO, you are required to purchase individual insurance for SCO. So immediately, if SCO is something I like, I've got to buy individual insurance, and SCO is something that I don't have access to. If I'm in ARC, immediately you're tying the insurance decision in with the commodity decision. But more broadly, because ARC-CO and PLC are different risk management programs, there is no reason to think that necessarily you would buy the same insurance with ARC-CO as with PLC given the situation for that year. I could conceive with many situations that you would in fact choose a different level of coverage, maybe even a different insurance product if you were in PLC as opposed to ARC-CO. This issue is well beyond the time frame of this particular discussion, but I think it's an important thing to acknowledge and to at least think through. Now, you may say, I don't want to really consider my insurance decisions. That's certainly an appropriate decision matrix, and say all I want to focus on is ARC-CO versus PLC. There's no right or wrong approach. What you have done is you have narrowed the decision, and you're not taking into account the full breadth of the question that you should be considering. And if that's an active decision that you made, that's fine. But if it's a passive decision or one you make by default, that's when you can get into making poor management decisions. So understand the broad question that you might want to ask yourself. If you want to constrain it, that's fine, but make that an active decision. In terms of the bottom observation, it is common to hear that ARC-CO is more complex than PLC. But I think in terms of the decision, ARC-CO is actually easier to understand than PLC plus SCO because ARC-CO is a single program. If you're going to think about PLC and SCO, you've got to think about two separate programs, and you've got to think about how they interact with one another, whereas ARC-CO is a single program, and you interpret it as a single program, and that makes the interpretation and the understanding of the program that much more simpler. So be cautious about thinking that ARC-CO is more complex than PLC when you add SCO into the decision matrix. I'd like to talk a little bit, I don't want to go into great detail, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the calculation formulas that are used to determine payments by ARC-CO and PLC. Again, I don't want to spend large amounts of time on the formulas, but I think it's important to understand the general framework of the formulas. Okay? First thing to keep in mind is that ARC-CO and PLC pay on 85% of program acres, and they use crop year price. One of the real challenges that many producers will face is understanding crop year price. Crop year price is the average price received by all U.S. farmers for all 12 months of the crop year. The crop year is not a calendar year. The crop year for corn and soybeans, for example, starts on September 1 and ends on August 31. And essentially what the crop year price is the sum of all payments made to producers of a commodity, say corn, by the first buyers of that commodity divided by the number of bushels that was sold by all U.S. producers. This is a cash price for the U.S., but it's for the U.S. It's not for your local market. It's for 12 months, not for one day. It is a different cash price. And if one really wants to understand ARC-CO and PLC, one has to understand crop year price. And I encourage you, if you're concerned that you don't understand the season average nature, the U.S. average nature, that you spend some time thinking about crop year price. Okay? So, again, both of these programs use crop year price, and they pay on 85% of program acres. Okay? The ARC-CO payment formula is what's written at the top of this page. This is the payment per program acre. Then you're only paid on 85% of those acres. It makes a payment if the county revenue is less than 86% of the benchmark revenue. And the reason the word minimum is here is because that payment can't exceed 10% times the ARC revenue benchmark. So there's a cap at 10% on the ARC-CO payment per program acre. The revenue benchmark is a critical concept at ARC. The revenue benchmark is calculated as the Olympic average of the county yield divided by planted acres. So it's a planted acre yield over the 5 previous years. And you multiply that Olympic average of the county yield times the Olympic average of the U.S. crop year price for the 5 prior years. An Olympic average discards the high and the low values. So you have 5, let's say, yields. You take out the high yield, you take out the low yield, and then you divide the 3 remaining yields by 3. So that gives you the ARC revenue benchmark. The key thing to remember about this benchmark is that this benchmark will move with the market. If market revenue is moving lower, the benchmark will move lower. If the market revenue is moving higher, the benchmark will move higher. But remember, because it throws out the high and the low value, it might be 2 years, not next year, before the movement or change in the benchmark occurs. Of particular interest in terms of managing risk is that the revenue benchmark will move down over time. And so you have a series of low price years, a series of low revenue years. The ARC revenue benchmark will move lower. The actual revenue for the county will be the county yield per planted acre for that year times the U.S. crop year average price. Remember, the crop year average price is not known until after the crop year is completed, which will be for 2014 for corn and soybeans next August 31st. ARC-CO and PLC therefore will not make payments for any crop until October of 2015 for the 2014 year. Finally, one last really important thing about ARC is that ARC has a minimum price in its calculation. For each year, the price can be no lower than the PLC reference price. So there is actually a floor under the ARC-CO revenue benchmark, and that floor is determined by the interrelationship between the county yield and the PLC reference price. The PLC program payment per acre, in contrast, is the program payment yield. That was the yield that was determined in the program yield update decision that we had previously discussed, multiplied by the reference price minus the higher of either the U.S. crop year price or the loan rate. Okay? And that's the per acre program payment. You are paid on 85% of those acres. The program payment yield, remember, is a fixed yield, and that's been determined based upon your historical production period or your current countercyclical payment yield. The reference price is fixed by Congress. It does not vary over the length of the Farm Bill, as does the ARC revenue benchmark. It varies, although it does have this floor, but it does vary. And the payment cannot be larger than the difference between the reference price and the loan rate. So the key things to keep in mind here is that this is a price-only program. It pays only on price. The program payment yield is the yield that it uses. It doesn't vary, so it's not paying on yield variation. The only thing that it pays on is the variation in price, okay? And that the reference prices and the loan rates, which both factor into the calculation, have been fixed by Congress for the length of the Farm Bill. So, moving on to, these are the calculation formulas to keep in mind. Moving along to the implications of these calculation formulas for the management of risk themselves. Turning to PLC, or the Price Loss Coverage Program. PLC pays on 85% of program not planted acres, same thing as ARC-CO, if the crop year price is below the reference price. So the reference prices are what are now the term that has historically been used for target prices. And the 2014 Farm Bill did raise the target prices higher. The corn reference price is now $3.70 a bushel. The soybean reference price is $8.40 a bushel. And the wheat reference price is $5.50 a bushel. If the crop year average price is below one of those prices, then a PLC payment would be made to that crop. So for example, if for 2014 the corn year marketing price was $3.50, there would be a 20-cent payment, $3.70 minus $3.50, and that would be multiplied by the program yield for that FSA farm, multiplied by 85%, multiplied by the base acres on that farm for corn. And that assumes that you had elected PLC for that program. To reiterate, this is a price loss program. It's exactly what the name says, price loss coverage. It only makes payments if this crop year price is below the reference price. So this means for 12 months, the corn price must average below $3.70. As I said previously, I believe PLC is an effective program against multiple years of price risk where price is below the reference price for those multiple years. Okay? But beware, if price declines from 2013 or last year's levels and it stays at that, but stays above the reference price, hence my previous statement about PLC would not make any payments if crop year average prices was to average between $3.70 and $4, let's say, because you never get below $3.70. I would suggest that multiple years of corn prices between $3.70 and $4 would cause some significant stress on some farms, and yet PLC would not help you with that multiple year shallow loss. So again, as with any risk management program, there's a risk for which that program is designed to help you with. There are other risks for which it doesn't necessarily help you with those risks, or it doesn't help you as much with those risks because it's not designed for those risks. Turning to ARC-CO, or the Agriculture Risk Coverage County Program, as with PLC, it pays on 85% of program not planted acres. If the county revenue declines below 86% of the county benchmark revenue, which can be thought of in a simplistic way as the prior year Olympic average county revenue. But ARC-CO is capped at 10% of the benchmark revenue. So there is a maximum payment. It can't exceed 10% of the benchmark revenue. So if the benchmark revenue is $700 an acre, then the most that ARC-CO would pay would be $70. ARC-CO is a substantially revised acre program. There are many differences. For key differences to keep in mind is that unlike acre, which was elected by FSA farm, ARC-CO is elected by crop. So in acre, you had to put all your program crops into acre. You can only, in this particular bill, you may only put corn into ARC. Acre used state yields. ARC-CO uses county yields, so yields much closer to that of the individual farm. Acre did not have a minimum price. It would decline as low as the market price. In contrast, ARC-CO does have a minimum price, the PLC reference price that does establish a floor under the ARC-CO revenue benchmark. And finally, ARC-CO has a narrower coverage level than does acre. Acre had coverage between 67.5 and 90%. ARC's coverage level is 76% to 86%. The implication of this discussion is be very careful about bringing your framework and perspective on acre to ARC. They are related programs. They are both moving average revenue programs, but they have some significant fundamental differences that cause the programs from a risk management perspective to behave differently. In my thumbnail assessment of ARC-CO, I think this is a very effective program for multiple year shallow revenue losses. In other words, as I've said several times, if crop year prices stay between 370, 375, even down to 350 and 425 and stays there for multiple years, this is a program that will help you with that shallow year multiple risk. But beware if we have a disaster price scenario. For example, if corn prices were to be below $3 for multiple years, this is not the strength of ARC-CO, okay? That is the strength of PLC. So again, as with any risk management program, there are risks that the program will help you manage. It's usually one type of risk, and you need to understand that. There are other types of risks for which the program either doesn't help you manage that at all, or it does a relatively poor job of managing that. And again, as I've said several times, I see ARC-CO and PLC as different risk management programs. They help you manage a different type of risk. Moving on to SCO, to supplemental coverage option. Remember that this is an insurance product. So unlike ARC-CO and PLC, there is no payment limit. In ARC-CO and PLC and ARC-IC, there's a $125,000 payment entity payment limit. In the case of SCO, there is no payment limit. SCO is an insurance product. SCO is a county insurance product. It is not an individual farm insurance product. SCO pays on the acres planted to a crop, and it pays if over the growing season the county revenue or yield declines or falls into the SCO coverage zone. That's how I think of SCO. There's a coverage zone. And the coverage zone for SCO is that the county has a loss between the individual farm coverage level and 86%. So all SCO products will have 86% as the highest coverage level. The bottom coverage level, or the bottom part of the zone, will be determined on your individual farm coverage. So if I buy 85% individual farm insurance, my coverage zone under SCO will be 85 to 86%, or 1 percentage point. If, on the other hand, I buy 50% individual farm insurance, my potential coverage zone on SCO is 50% to 86%. Any loss greater than 50% in this particular case would be handled by individual farm insurance. Any loss between 50 and 86% at the county level would be handled by SCO. When thinking about SCO, I think the question is not, do I like SCO, but does SCO add cost competitive coverage versus higher individual insurance after considering the differential change in the farm and the county? It is important to underscore and to understand that SCO is a county either revenue or yield product, depending on what your underlying individual product is that you must purchase. I will talk now just about revenue, but understand that it could be yield. Okay, so you've got this product that is a county product. It is not an individual farm product. The farm and the county revenue and yield rarely change the same. If farm revenue decline, has been 20%, the county's decline may be 0. It may be that the county even went up 10%, or the county may have gone down 50%. That's what I mean by the farm and the county don't change the same. This is called basis risk by economists. It's a very important feature. Basis risk is very real, even in the smaller counties in Ohio. So when one buys county insurance, one has to understand that I am insuring the county, not my individual farm, and that my individual farm may well suffer a loss and I may receive no payment. Therefore, from a risk management perspective, from a risk protection perspective, individual farm insurance is usually considered better than county insurance because you are insuring what happens on that farm. Second point, the subsidy rate at which the government or the public subsidizes SCO insurance is 65%. Now that's a very good subsidy rate, but that subsidy rate is smaller than the commonly purchased enterprise insurance at all coverage levels up to and through 80%. It is only at 85% coverage that the subsidy level for SCO is greater than the subsidy level for the individual farm enterprise insurance. And then only by 12 percentage points, 65% subsidy for SCO versus a 53% subsidy for enterprise insurance. So the question that I think you need to pose to yourself is, if I like SCO because it provides coverage up to 86%, would I in fact be better off buying higher individual insurance coverage up to 80 or 85% as opposed to buying SCO? So it's not do I like SCO, it's do I like SCO relative to higher individual insurance. So when would, in my thinking, when would it be a clear consideration to consider SCO? One would be if, for my county, I do not have access to 85% or 80% enterprise insurance. In many counties in this country, particularly many counties west of the Mississippi River, it is not, you do not have access to 85% or 80% enterprise insurance. In that case, the only way that I can get to 86% coverage is to buy SCO. It seems to me you confront a very different decision. You're facing a very different decision complex if you have access to enterprise insurance at 85% and if you don't have access to enterprise insurance at 85%. And then secondly, SCO will generally be cheaper because it's county insurance. You're insuring county revenue, county yield, which doesn't vary as much as individual farm revenue or yield. So it will generally be cheaper. And so if your farm has a serious cash flow constraint or is cash flow constrained, then SCO may make good sense to think about, because it will provide you at least some protection against downside risk, but the protection will be at the county level, not at the individual farm level. I want to also talk about the ARC-IC, or the Agricultural Risk Coverage Program, individual. This is a program that early in the discussion of the Farm Bill was seen as the third choice in most situations, if not all situations. In general, I would agree that this applies to more narrow situations than does ARC, CO, and PLC, but I think it's very important for all producers not to simply dismiss ARC-IC because it only pays on 65% of program acres, not the 85% that ARC-CO and PLC pays on. So you're going to get fewer payment acres under ARC-IC. And also because its calculations really are complex. And if you want to explore ARC-IC, you really do need to use the calculators. Because there is a series of very complex calculations. I'm not going to go through all of those, but that's absolutely correct. It is complex. But just because it pays on fewer program acres, and just because its calculations are complex, does not mean that this isn't a program that might have real relevance to your particular farm. And so if you're going to dismiss ARC-IC, what I would ask is that you do that after thinking it through, not just by saying, I don't want to deal with ARC-IC. The overview of ARC-IC, and I'm not going to go into all the complex calculations as I said earlier, but to think about what ARC-IC does is that it's a program, it's a risk management program that pays on the average experience of all covered crops planted on the whole ARC-IC farm unit. When the revenue across all covered or program crops that are planted on that farm is less than 86% of the ARC-IC farm unit revenue benchmark, a payment is made. As with ARC-CO, the payment is capped at 10%. So there is a maximum payment that's equal to 10%. And again, payment is on 65% of your program acres, not on 100% of your program acres, or not on 100% of your planted acres. This is a program acre and paid on 65%. Be very cautious how you interpret ARC-IC. The word individual leads you to believe that this is an individual FSA farm program. That can be true, but it is only true if a producer has only one FSA farm in a state in ARC-IC. So in Ohio, if you put two farms as a producer into ARC-IC, those farms are combined. It's not an individual farm then, it's the two FSA farms combined. So the word individual is somewhat deceptive, okay? And you just need to keep that in mind. And ARC-IC is really only an individual farm program if you put only one FSA farm in a state in ARC-IC. For example, in Ohio, if you have multiple FSA farms and you put only one into ARC-IC, one of your Ohio farms, then that would be an ARC-IC individual farm program. If you put two or more in, it's really then a combined ARC-IC farm unit. My thumbnail assessment of ARC-IC is that there are several instances where I could see ARC-IC being a very real consideration. One is if production on the ARC-IC farm is highly variable. In the state of Ohio, this could be river bottom land, an FSA farm that's river bottom land where you can be flooded out or you can have very good yields. This could be some of the more droughty soils in the state where if you don't get rain after August 1st, yields really decline. So you're talking about an FSA farm that has highly variable production. Good years, bad years, big differences between those two. ARC-IC becomes very attractive in this situation in my mind. If you only put one FSA farm in, you only plant one crop per year, and the reason is because you have a fairly high probability of a payment over the 5 years, 2014 to 2018, because production is so variable and there is no premium in this situation. So in a sense, you're creating an insurance-like product because you're using only one farm and only one crop. So highly variable production environment. I think ARC-IC is worth considering. I'm not arguing that you take ARC-IC. I think it is a consideration that you might find attractive and that you need to think through. The second situation I want to call your attention to is if you plant fruits and vegetables on the ARC-IC farm unit. Ever since the 1996 Farm Bill, we have had restrictions in this country on the planting of fruits and vegetables. In simplicity, the restrictions have taken the form that if you plant fruits and vegetables on base program acres, you will lose the payment on those acres. The 2014 Farm Bill has relaxed the restrictions on planting fruits and vegetables. Specifically, what it says is that you can plant fruits and vegetables on non-payment acres and still continue to receive payment. Even if you plant those non-payment acres to fruits and vegetables. So, in the case of ARC-CO and PLC, you receive payment on 85% of your base acres, but you don't receive a payment on 15% of your program or base acres. You can plant fruits and vegetables on that 15% of your acres and not lose any program payments. ARC-IC only pays on 65% of your program acres, so I can plant up to 35% of my base acres on that ARC-IC farm to fruits and vegetables and not lose any payments. So if you have a farm that's an ARC-IC farm or an ARC-IC farm unit with multiple FSA farms, and you're going to plant or think you might plant fruits and vegetables sometime between 2015 and 2018 to fruits and vegetables, ARC-IC gives you greater flexibility to plant that farm to fruits and vegetables, to plant more acres to fruits and vegetables, and not lose farm program payments. Again, I'm not making an argument that you take ARC-IC in this situation. I'm only making the argument that ARC-IC is worth considering in this situation. And again, back to my broader point, don't let the complexity of the calculations, don't let the fact that it pays on only 65% of program acres versus 85% deter you from looking at the program. Make the decision to use ARC-IC or not use ARC-IC, an active decision that better enhances your farm. With this covers the program crop decision that you want to make. Again, I want to stress that I think there are some very big questions that you need to consider. Those 4 questions that we talked about earlier. Does ARC-IC fit your FSA farm? Is SCO a cost-competitive insurance product compared to higher individual insurance? Do I want to weight the more well-known 2014 payment higher than that which is uncertain with regard to 2015 and 2018 through 2018? The fact that I know more about 2014, does that mean more to me? And do I want to diversify across ARC, CO, and PLC if I have multiple FSA farms? Those 4 questions, there's no right or there's no wrong, but they are critical questions in assessing the decision of which one of these three program options that you wish to select for the years 2014 through 2018. I wish you the best of luck in making this decision. Thank you very much for listening.